Welcome. Not to a place you know, nor a time you've ever lived. But to a memory whispered between atoms, floating beneath the fabric of what we call Earth. Tonight, let me take you somewhere far, far beyond oceans and continents, beyond names and history. Before the world had rivers. Before it had tides. Before the word sea meant water. There was a time when liquid moved across the land, cold, alien, and without a drop of H2O. A time when the wind didn't carry the scent of salt, but the sharp tang of methane and things even the present has forgotten how to name. If you close your eyes and listen, you might just feel it. That strange silence humming beneath our oceans. A world that might have been, if water never came. In this story, there are no cities. No voices. Only a blue planet, still learning what it means to breathe. And a sea, that wasn't water. So, lie back. Let your thoughts slow. There's no need to understand everything, only to feel it unfold. We'll drift together into a time so distant it feels like fiction. But it isn't. It's real. Real like the ground under your feet. Real like the stars still blinking from that same sky, even after 4 billion years. Are you ready? Let's begin. What if the oceans had never become water? What if, in the earliest breaths of Earth's existence, the seas that wrapped around the young planet had stayed as something else, something stranger, colder, darker? Would life have ever begun? Would breath have ever existed? Would there even be a word for blue? We often imagine the birth of Earth as a fiery tale, magma, smoke, and steam rising into the void. But between the bursts of molten rock and the forming of land, there were pools. Silent pools. Not of water, but of liquid methane and ethane, spreading across jagged plains like ghosts looking for a place to settle. They weren't warm. They weren't gentle. And yet, they moved. They carved. They shaped. What if that had been enough? What if those alien oceans had claimed Earth forever, never giving water a chance to fall, to flow, to change the game? You see, water wasn't the first to touch this planet in liquid form. Long before raindrops fell and rivers sang, Earth may have shimmered with a cold, toxic sea. A sea that didn't evaporate under the sun, but clung to the rock like memory. A sea that wasn't a cradle, but a closed door. Science rarely tells us this story. It focuses on what became, not what nearly was. But tonight, we allow ourselves to wonder. To wonder if Earth almost became a different world. To wonder if life was once delayed, paused by the wrong kind of liquid. To wonder how close we came to never being here at all. So ask yourself, what makes a planet alive? Is it temperature? Chemistry? Motion? Or just luck? Perhaps the greatest oceans are not the ones we sail across, but the ones that nearly kept us from ever sailing. We call them forgotten seas. And tonight, we will remember them. Let's go back. Not by centuries, not even by millions of years. Let's fall backward through time so far that names like Cretaceous or Cambrian sound like headlines from this morning's news. Let's leave behind all familiar things, oxygen, leaves, light, even the color blue. We arrive in a world so young it doesn't yet know what kind of planet it wants to be. The Earth is still bleeding from its birth. Its surface, a jagged mosaic of fresh crust and bubbling scars, trembles underfoot like something half asleep and still dreaming. There is no silence here, but there is no life either. Just the low, endless hum of a planet exhaling for the very first time. You stand on the edge of what might become a continent, though it doesn't look like land. It's black, sharp, uneven. Warm, but not alive. Overhead, the sky isn't blue. It's a soupy darkness with flickers of red and orange, chemical veils that dance and boil and sting your lungs if you dare to breathe. But there is no breath yet. Nothing to breathe. No lungs to inhale. And where you expect to find ocean, there is something else entirely. Shadows ripple across vast, dark plains. They are not water. They are colder. Thicker. Oil-like. They glisten in the faint light like the surface of an obsidian mirror. You think you see waves, but they don't behave like waves. They shift without rhythm, curling in directions that defy your sense of gravity. This is not water. This is liquid methane. Liquid ethane. Liquid shadows. These chemicals rain from the sky and flow across the rock. They don't nourish. They don't evaporate. They settle. They claim the land. The air above them smells like a forgotten memory, acrid, metallic, and faintly sweet, like something trying to lure life in only to smother it. The ocean, you see, doesn't invite. It watches. Quietly. Patiently. For millions of years, this is how Earth remains. A place where temperature and chemistry strike a delicate balance, not for life, but for stillness. The methane seas remain unchallenged. There is no thunderstorm to stir them, no river to meet them, no sun strong enough to boil them away. You look up and realize that stars still blink through the chemical haze. Even in this alien world, the universe watches. From far away. From a distance that cannot be measured by years alone. And you, somehow, are here. Not to interfere. Not to change. Only to remember. This moment. This sea. This version of Earth. Before the water came. Before the possibility of breath. Before the word life meant anything at all. Here, the planet waits. Not passively, but with a tension you can almost feel through your feet. A readiness. A pause before the next act. But for now, nothing moves. And in that stillness, lies the memory of everything that almost didn't happen. The world stretches before you, but it feels like it was never meant to be seen. You stand at the edge of something vast and unmoving, a horizon wrapped in smoke and silence. Not the kind of silence that comes after a snowfall, but something deeper. A silence of potential. Of pause. Of a world still deciding if it wants to continue. The sky is heavy. Not because of clouds, but because of weight. It hangs low and thick with chemicals that roll and churn in slow, molten spirals. Methane. Ammonia. Hydrogen sulfide. Gases that sting the imagination and crush the idea of breath. Above, the sun is little more than a red smear, fighting to pierce through the orange haze. It doesn't shine, it bleeds. Its light is warped and bent by layers of hydrocarbons that float like ghosts in the upper sky. You look up, but there is no comfort. Only distortion. Only murk. And yet, there is beauty here. A kind of terrible, perfect beauty. The land is jagged and restless. Volcanoes rise like ancient beasts frozen mid-roar, their mouths forever open, spitting columns of gas that stretch so high they seem to vanish into other dimensions. The rock is raw. It glows faintly at the edges, still hot from the planet's violent birth. Rivers do not run. There is no water to carve them. Instead, chemical rain trickles in rivulets that evaporate into vapor before they can shape anything. Pools form in shallow craters, pools not of life, but of waiting. A slick, mirror-like sheen rests on the surface of each one, reflecting not the sky, but the color of what's missing. Blue is not here. Green is not here. Not yet. Only reds. Yellows. Shadows edged with rust. You walk through a basin where mountains are still being born. Stone buckles and breathes beneath your feet, groaning with the weight of ancient forces pressing from within. Every few moments, the ground trembles, not with malice, but as if the planet itself is dreaming. There is wind. But it carries no song. It whistles through sharp canyons and over shattered plateaus, dragging with it particles that burn your skin and stain the air. Dust from the oldest stones. Ash from the first eruptions. The past, already trying to bury itself. Along the coasts, if you can call them that, the dark seas lap silently against the rock. The liquid is thick, almost syrupy. It coats, but does not soak. When the waves rise, they don't crash, they sigh. As if reluctant to move at all. And still, there is no life. No insects buzz in the heat. No leaves shiver in the breeze. No moss crawls across stone. Only a silence that settles like snow, but never melts. But in this silence, a story waits. The story of how something can come from nothing. How even a planet covered in toxic rain and liquid shadows can one day whisper a name, grow a lung, open an eye. But that moment is still far away. Right now, this world belongs to chemistry. To heat and pressure. To balance sheets written in molecules and minerals. And to the sea. The sea that isn't water. The sea that remembers what almost was. The sea that watches, still and strange, as the first chapter of Earth writes itself, in vapor, stone, and time. Lift your gaze. Beyond the haze, beyond the thickening gas layers and shimmering surfaces of methane seas, there is a sky. And above that sky, there is space. It is not the romantic void we picture today, glittering with stars, framed by telescopes and colored by dreams. No. Back then, it was colder. Darker. Hungrier. But even so. Earth hung there. A soft, imperfect sphere. Spinning slowly in silence. A planet unfinished. Not yet blue. Not yet alive. Just, trying. From a great distance, you wouldn't know this was the Earth. There were no oceans reflecting sunlight. No continents to break the roundness. No weather systems or clouds casting shadows. Just a surface dimly lit with the reddish glow of early sunrises, wrapped in swirling coats of hydrocarbons. A planet halfway between fire and frost. To the young sun, blazing but still maturing, Earth was a restless child. Closer than we are today, the sun bathed Earth in light and radiation that felt far more intense. But that light couldn't reach the surface. Not yet. It was filtered, bent, scattered by a chaotic soup of gases that refused to let color pass. So even though the sun burned above, Earth remained cloaked in twilight. And it wasn't alone. Orbiting close, far closer than you might imagine, was the moon. But not the pale, quiet companion we know today. Back then, it loomed. Massive. Rough. Covered in fresh scars from the impact that had birthed it. Craters still steaming. Surface still settling. A newborn moon, hovering barely 25,000 kilometers away, nearly 10 times closer than it is now. From the surface of Earth, it would have dominated the sky, 3 times larger than anything our modern eyes have seen. Its gravity pulled at Earth's insides, stirring tides not of water, but of molten rock and methane. It slowed Earth's spin, tugged at its still-forming core, and whispered through its orbit. You are not alone. You were never meant to be still. Together, Earth and Moon danced. A tight, unstable orbit. Not yet in harmony, but bound. One born of the other. Beyond the Moon, other planets spun. Mercury scorched. Venus smoldered. Mars waited with its dry riverbeds unborn. Jupiter, already enormous, crackled with storms. Saturn wore no rings yet, but they were coming. It was a solar system still choosing its form. A theater of possibilities. And in one small corner, Earth, a troubled stage for a play that hadn't begun. There were no observers. No telescopes pointed in curiosity. No one to give this planet a name. But had there been, they might have wondered why such chaos was allowed to persist. Why this world was not wiped clean and replaced. Why something so unstable, so toxic, was being given time. But that's the thing about time. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need permission. It simply unfolds. And so Earth spun on. Each rotation slowing, thanks to the pull of its lunar companion. Each day stretching longer than the one before. Each orbit carving deeper patterns into its future. The sun warmed. The moon drifted farther. Earth cooled. Slightly. But still no life. Still no water. Still just the watchful methane seas, reflecting starlight back into a sky too thick to see. And above it all, the universe waited. Not impatiently. Not expectantly. Just, there. Vast. Unknowable. Indifferent. But even indifference can make room for wonder. And somewhere in that darkness, a question echoed, quietly, invisibly. What might this world become? Beneath the toxic sky and the seas of liquid shadow, something deeper was happening. You couldn't see it from the surface. You couldn't hear it, not in the way we understand sound. But it was there. Moving. Growing. The crust of the earth, thin, fragile, still blistered from planetary birth, was beginning to shift. At first, the movement was subtle. A gentle bulge. A ripple through half-cooled rock. Then, over hundreds of thousands of years, it grew bolder. Cracks appeared like wrinkles on a sleeping face. Rifts opened like forgotten mouths. It was not chaos. It was choreography. The planet was beginning to breathe. Its core, still molten and wild from the violence of formation, churned with heat and metallic fury. Iron and nickel danced under pressure no life could survive. This inner engine was restless, and it pushed upward, through mantle, through stone, through every barrier that dared to form. Volcanoes were the first voices of this inner world. They didn't erupt with flourish. They oozed. They groaned. They poured lava like thoughts too heavy to keep inside. Massive flood basalts spilled across the land, layering the earth in miles of fresh, black stone. Each flow a paragraph in the long, slow poem of geology. You could stand at the edge of one of these early eruptions and watch continents be born in silence. No screaming skies. No birds fleeing. No forests burning. Just rock meeting air, and air retreating in defeat. And beneath all this, the plates began to move. Not like today, not in tidy sheets or distinct boundaries. But in scattered fragments, drifting on a mantle that simmered like an uneasy sea. These first tectonic stirrings laid the foundation for mountains yet to rise, oceans yet to form. It was tectonics without instruction. Plates without names. But movement was movement. Sometimes the ground would tear, forming deep trenches where magma bled up like forgotten light. Other times, masses of stone would collide, crumpling upward into the earliest swells of future continents. Proto-shields. Cratons. Names we give now to things that had no audience then. This was not a peaceful world. But it was determined. Each fracture in the crust let gases escape, shaping the atmosphere. Each eruption poured new elements onto the surface, silicon, magnesium, carbon. Ingredients for landscapes, for oceans, and, eventually, for life. But life was still a whisper, not yet spoken. For now, the only motion came from Earth itself. The land boiled slowly. The crust thickened, cracked, healed, and cracked again. In some places, magma formed pockets that cooled into stone harder than anything we know. In others, entire regions sank, becoming basins where the strange liquid seas gathered and waited. And above this restless crust, the methane oceans lapped the new land. They watched, as if curious. As if unsure whether this movement meant threat or promise. And still, Earth breathed. The first breath of geology. The first exhale of pressure. It would take hundreds of millions of years for this breath to become rhythm. For these motions to carve the world into shapes we'd recognize. For tectonic plates to settle into the drifting puzzle of continents and seafloors. But everything started here. In the silence beneath the stone. In the heat under the shadowed sea. In the slow, patient shifting of a planet learning how to move. And though no one was there to mark the moment, this was the beginning of direction. Of change. Of the possibility that one day, this place might host not just fire and gas, but memory. For eons, Earth had known only one kind of sea. Seas that didn't steam. That didn't stir with life. That didn't ripple under rain or reflect the color of sky. Seas made of methane. Ethane. Liquid hydrocarbons pulled from the sky and settled onto stone like silent ink. They were ancient. Familiar. And alone. But then, something new came. Something impossible. A molecule made not of carbon, but of hydrogen and oxygen. H2O. Water. No one knows exactly when the first drops fell. Or where. Maybe it wasn't rain at all. Maybe it came from deep within the planet, from minerals in the mantle releasing vapor as the Earth exhaled. Or maybe it rode in from space, hidden in comets and icy asteroids that slammed into the crust with fire and ice in equal measure. What we do know is that once it came, it didn't leave. The first appearance of water didn't look like a flood. It looked like steam. Hazy clouds clung to the sky, condensing slowly as the planet cooled. Rain fell. Not in warm spring showers, but in scalding sheets. Boiling droplets striking molten rock, hissing, vanishing. But Earth was cooling. Slowly. And water, persistent as it is, kept falling. Eventually, it found places to stay. In fractures between crust. In basins carved by volcanic collapse. In lowlands where the methane seas had already made way. Water pooled, shimmered, and cooled. For the first time, Earth reflected its own sky, dim and colorless though it was. To the methane seas, this was a threat. Water mixed with hydrocarbons, breaking their chemical calm. It refused to play by the same rules. It boiled when it shouldn't, froze when it wasn't asked. It carried minerals. Dissolved rock. Moved things. It was not a sea that sat still. It was a sea that changed everything it touched. And it touched more and more. As rain increased, and volcanic heat declined, water began to dominate. The pools became lakes. The lakes became inland seas. And finally, somewhere, somehow, they became oceans. Oceans with tides. With waves. With memory. They didn't destroy the methane seas all at once. But they pushed them back. Replaced them. Transformed them. Slowly, but irreversibly. And under these new oceans, the Earth changed. Water broke down minerals, releasing nutrients that had never moved before. It carried energy. It created gradients, differences in temperature, in salinity, in depth. Places where chemistry could play. Where reactions could hide. Where life might whisper its first word. For the first time, the sea wasn't silent. It gurgled. It moved. It thought. The sea that wasn't water had been the Earth's first lullaby. But the sea that was water. That was its first breath. And so, the planet changed. Not all at once. Not with a roar. But with a gentle insistence. One drop at a time. Look up. If you were standing on the surface of Earth in those early days, water pooling at your feet, stones still steaming beneath your toes, if you dared to lift your eyes, you would not see blue. There was no blue. The sky above was thick. Not with clouds, not with weather, but with chemicals. Curtains of methane and ammonia. Hydrogen swirling with carbon monoxide. Volcanic vapors, sulfur dioxide, chlorine gas, rising from vents and lingering in layers too dense to move. The sun was still there. Still shining. But it could barely get through. Its light, when it pierced the haze, painted everything in copper and violet. A permanent dusk, tinged with poison. This was the first atmosphere. It didn't invite life. It challenged it. There was no oxygen. Not a molecule. Not a trace. O2, the gas you now inhale without thinking, would have been a deadly intruder in this world. Too reactive. Too unstable. Too unnatural. Instead, the air pulsed with heat and chemistry. Every breath. If there had been lungs to take it, would have burned, suffocated, collapsed. There were no sounds of wind rustling through trees, no calls of birds, no whispers of leaves. Only pressure. Only hiss. Only the soft crackle of molecules colliding in a sky that did not care. And yet, this was home. This heavy, hostile atmosphere was the Earth's first skin. A boundary between space and substance. It kept warmth in. It kept radiation out. It allowed rain to fall, seas to pool, rocks to weather. It was violent. But it was protection. From above, the planet might have looked like a dim ember wrapped in smoke. From below, the sky seemed infinite, not because it was vast, but because it never cleared. You could walk 1,000 miles and never see a star. But this atmosphere did something more. It fed the oceans. Through its gases, acids formed. Rain became not just water, but a chemical cocktail. When it struck stone, it tore minerals free, dissolved metals, shifted elements. It was not rain as we know it, it was evolution in liquid form. The air and the sea began a dialogue. Ammonia sank into the water. Sulfur formed clouds. Methane hovered low over warm pools, shimmering like breath over hot stone. These gases didn't destroy the oceans. They enriched them. Gave them complexity. Gave them questions to answer. And deep beneath this toxic sky, somewhere in the silence, something was listening. Not with ears. Not with thought. But with structure. With carbon. With pattern. The air above had no idea. But it was helping. It was, unwittingly, preparing the stage for a story it would never fully understand. And so the first atmosphere endured. For millions of years, it cloaked the earth in uncertainty. It wrapped the planet in shadows, muffled the stars, carried the scent of unfamiliar chemistry. It threatened life, and yet, somehow, it became its midwife. Because sometimes, before breath comes, there must be something to make you hold it. No one saw it happen. There were no eyes. No minds. No language to record the moment. No witnesses to marvel. And yet, it happened. Somewhere beneath the churning clouds and behind the veil of methane rain, in a puddle no larger than your hand, life began. It didn't look like anything we know. It didn't swim or breathe or grow in ways we'd recognize. It didn't hunt or feel or even know it existed. But it did something no stone, no gas, no flame had ever done before. It made a copy. And then another. This wasn't magic. It was chemistry. But it was chemistry pushed past a line, into something the planet had never seen. A molecule, complex and improbable, built from carbon and hydrogen, wrapped in chance, folded by heat, stirred by the rhythms of an early ocean. It didn't plan. It didn't choose. It simply was. Maybe it clung to a mineral surface, iron, perhaps, or pyrite. Maybe it floated in a warm vent, hidden in the cracks of the ocean crust. Maybe it formed in a tiny droplet, suspended in the greasy soup of early seas. However it happened, it stayed. And because it stayed, it changed. The first life on Earth didn't roar into being. It whispered. Tiny strands of matter, self-organizing in water still heavy with death. They didn't photosynthesize. They didn't move. But they endured. That was enough. They were single. They were small. And they were the most powerful thing this planet had ever produced. They began to eat, chemical nutrients dissolved in the sea. They absorbed energy, replicated, mutated. Not perfectly. Never perfectly. But sometimes, a change helped. Sometimes, the copied version lasted a little longer. And so, life grew. Slowly. Quietly. There were no predators. No prey. No competition, save for the laws of physics and the availability of molecules. The first ecosystem was a lonely place, but it was not still. In these shallow, darkened seas, millions of tiny lives began their cycles. Live, divide, drift, repeat. Most failed. Some endured. A few began to shape the very water around them. They released gases, waste, by our terms. But not meaningless. Some gases floated upward, into the heavy sky. Others reacted with minerals. The chemistry of the sea began to change, not by accident, but by living. These first lifeforms did not seek transformation. They simply tried to survive. But in doing so, they became the architects of everything to come. We don't know their names. We don't even know their exact forms. All we know is that they were the beginning. They were not grand. But they were enough. And so Earth, once a place of fire and silence, now held something utterly new, intention. Not in thought. Not in will. But in repetition. In persistence. In the quiet, stubborn echo of molecules trying again. And again. And again. And one day, those echoes would become forests. Those puddles would become oceans. Those cells would become us. But back then, they didn't know. They didn't know they were alive. They didn't know they were history. They didn't know they had changed the rules of the universe. They just floated. In a sea that once was poison. Under a sky that once threatened death. Within a world that had only just begun to dream. They didn't know they were changing anything. They didn't know there was a world to change. The early microbes that floated in Earth's first oceans had no eyes, no thoughts, no desires. They existed because the chemistry allowed it. Because the sea was just warm enough. Because the molecules, by sheer coincidence, clicked together in ways that could persist. But they did something else. They learned to use light. Not as we do, not to see or to paint or to grow flowers. But to fuel themselves. To extract energy from the sun's faint glow, even through the thick, hazy sky. They became phototrophs. And soon after, some became something far more radical. Oxygenic phototrophs. They began to split water. H2O plus sunlight sugar plus O2. It was elegant. Efficient. And absolutely catastrophic. Because oxygen was poison. To nearly every other form of life at the time, oxygen was a reactive, unstable menace. It broke bonds. Burned cells. Destroyed fragile chemistry. But these microbes didn't care. They released oxygen as waste. Tiny bubbles rising to the surface, bursting into a sky that wasn't ready. At first, it vanished. Reacted instantly with iron in the ocean, forming rust-red clouds that settled onto the seafloor. Bands of iron oxide layered themselves into stone, what we now call banded iron formations. A geological signature of silent rebellion. Still, the oxygen came. Still, the bubbles rose. Every second, every hour, these tiny creatures inhaled light and exhaled a future no one had asked for. They didn't march. They didn't protest. They didn't build tools or form thoughts. They just breathed. And their breath rewrote the planet. Over millions of years, the oceans changed. The chemistry shifted. Iron disappeared from the water. Other gases fled. And oxygen, relentless, dangerous, transformative, began to linger. First in pockets. Then in currents. Then in the atmosphere. The sky itself began to change. No longer just methane and ammonia and shadow. A new gas joined the mix. Transparent. Sharp. Reacting with everything it touched. At first, it destroyed. Then, it opened doors. Oxygen allowed energy to flow in ways life had never seen. New metabolisms emerged. New strategies. Slowly, a diversification began. The age of silence was ending. But the architects of this change, the microbes, remained mostly the same. They had no idea. They never saw a leaf, or a lung, or a single breath from a future child. They didn't know they were creating possibility. They only lived. And in that living, they altered the sea. The air. The stone. They gave Earth its second skin. Not one of poison and haze. But of breath. And when you inhale now, you're pulling in the echoes of those bubbles. A gift from lives that never meant to give anything at all. This was evolution, not as a battle cry, but as a whisper. Not as triumph, but as patience. The quietest revolution in history. And like all the greatest changes, it began in the dark. Try to imagine a world that breathes, but does not speak. Where nothing sings. Nothing walks. Nothing screams or cries or hums. A world where the only sounds come from the planet itself. This was Earth in the age before voice. Before music. Before even the softest rustle of a leaf. The oceans were full of life now, billions of microbes drifting, dividing, thriving. They changed the chemistry of the sea. They painted iron into stone. They exhaled oxygen like a quiet prayer. But they made no sound. Their world was dense, cold, and calm. The sea was not yet full of splashes or churning currents. It moved like breath under silk, slow, steady, unannounced. Above, the sky had begun to clear. Oxygen, though still rare, had begun to rise. Methane was fading. The haze was thinning. And for the first time in the history of Earth, light touched the ground with clarity. But the light was silent. It had always been silent. And the land. The land did not yet know movement. No footsteps ever pressed into its surface. No wings ever cut through its air. No mouths ever opened to call or cry. Only the wind moved freely, slipping through stone valleys, brushing over barren ridges. But it found nothing to rattle. No branches. No fur. No feathers. Just rock. Just time. Just waiting. Occasionally, the ground would tremble. Not with violence, but with memory. Magma shifted beneath the crust, pushing, pulling, reshaping. Volcanoes sighed sulfur into the air. Earthquakes whispered through the mantle. But even those were muffled by distance. If you stood alone on a coastline, just you, the rock, and the sea, you would hear only your own breath. And even that, back then, would not have been allowed. Because there were no lungs. No ears. No heartbeat to carry sound from one body to another. There were only forms. Silent. Still. Surviving. And yet. This world, quiet as it was not dead. It was becoming. Every microbe in the sea, every molecule shifting in the air, was part of a slow crescendo no one could yet hear. The first great silence was not absence, it was preparation. Earth was composing something. Not a song made of notes or rhythms. But a symphony of conditions. Temperature. Pressure. Chemistry. The ingredients for noise, waiting in stillness. Had you been there, standing on a basalt cliff, watching the first rays of light pierce a thinning sky, you might have felt it. Not heard it. Felt it. A tension beneath the calm. A breath waiting to be exhaled. And though no voice echoed across the oceans, a future was humming just beneath the waves. In time, things would crawl. Things would leap. Things would sing. But not yet. For now, Earth whispered. And the sea. The sea held its breath. They weren't continents. Not yet. Not by any familiar measure. But they were rising. From the depths of the early oceans, those cold, oxygen-starved, whispering seas, something began to emerge. Rock. Not freshly cooled lava. Not the endless plains of basalt shaped by volcanoes. But something older. Something stronger. Something structured. Cratons. Protocontinents. The planet's first bones. You could not mistake them for the lush, green landmasses we know today. They bore no soil. No rivers. No roots. Their surfaces were harsh, wind-cut, jagged, blistered by radiation. And yet, they were stable. They did not melt back into the mantle. They did not crumble beneath the weight of time. They endured. Their formation was no accident. Beneath the oceans, tectonic forces had been stirring, subtle, rhythmic, persistent. Where plates collided, crust thickened. Heat transformed soft stone into hardened minerals. Pressure forged new layers, new identities. Amphibolites. Greenstone belts. Iron-rich formations folded like origami by planetary stress. These were not decorations. They were declarations. Here, the Earth was practicing architecture. Mountains didn't yet climb skyward, but ridges and domes began to rise above the sea. They peeked through the mist like ancient monoliths, their surfaces shimmering with thin films of chemical salt and iron dust. They were small. They were quiet. But they changed everything. For the first time, light could touch stone above water. Rain could fall and not vanish instantly. Wind could meet resistance. And perhaps most importantly, life could cling. Not complex life. Not movement. But films. Mats. Colonies of microbes forming sticky sheets across mineral surfaces, feeding on light, on heat, on sulfur. These microbial mats didn't decorate the rocks. They transformed them. Over time, they built layers. Trapped sediments. Secreted minerals. And in doing so, they sculpted some of the oldest fossils we've ever found. Stromatolites. Layered, domed structures, half living, half stone, grown inch by inch, century by century, beneath a sun no one had ever seen clearly. They were not tall. They were not fast. But they were ancient. And they were persistent. The land beneath them remembered every chemical shift. Every rainfall. Every moment the sea receded, only to return again. These first structures, both the rising land and the life that clung to it, became memory made physical. Geological memory. Biological persistence. They marked time not with clocks or calendars, but with layers of sediment, banded iron, and silence. Today, some still remain. In the oldest parts of Australia. In the heart of ancient Canada. In rocks older than bones, older than trees, older than oxygen itself. They are Earth's first monuments. Not carved by hand, but by pressure. Not imagined by minds, but by motion. A landscape of scars and shapes. Proof that even without a plan, a planet can learn to build. At first, the planet felt only extremes. It was either searing or frozen. Choking or silent. Too much or too little, never in balance. But slowly, balance began to flirt with the idea of existing. And with it came, climate. Not in the way we know it now, not with predictable seasons, warm springs, or crisp autumns. But with something far more volatile. Feedback. The first architects of this new instability were not volcanoes or oceans. They were microbes. Tiny, breathless organisms releasing gases as byproducts of their metabolism. Methane. Carbon dioxide. Greenhouse gases. And the planet, unaware of what it was becoming, responded. When methane filled the air, heat stayed close. The atmosphere thickened. The oceans warmed. The crust softened. And life, simple, quiet life, thrived. But methane is fragile. When too much oxygen entered the sky, thanks again to those tireless cyanobacteria, methane broke down. And when it broke down, the heat left. Temperatures dropped. Oceans cooled. Ice began to form, first at the poles, then creeping toward the equator. For the first time, the Earth began to shiver. These were not the ice ages you've heard about. These were older. Harsher. Global in scale. Entire seas froze over. Volcanic steam became snow. The sky dimmed. The planet nearly died of its own breath. And then, volcanoes answered. From the mantle, carbon dioxide burst forth in clouds thick enough to choke the sky. The heat returned. Ice melted. The seas steamed. And once again, life resumed. These cycles repeated, not smoothly, not gently, but like the swings of a pendulum unbalanced. A planet trying to find its rhythm, failing, and trying again. The climate had no memory. But the rocks did. Each layer of sediment recorded a change. Each isotopic ratio whispered of warming or freezing. Each ripple fossilized in stone spoke of storms, of floods, of silence. This was the age of climate without calendars. The Earth's breath was not yet steady. Its temperature not yet tamed. But this chaos was creative. It forced adaptation. It tested survival. It pushed life, not forward, but deeper. Into vent systems. Into rocks. Into silence. And it prepared the stage for what would come next. A world with weather. With cycles. With seasons that could be trusted. But for now, Earth remained unpredictable. It could be paradise by morning and a frozen tomb by night. Its skies could burst with rain, then hold their breath for 1,000,000 years. Its oceans could boil, then lock in ice. And beneath it all, the land remembered. Every rise. Every fall. Every moment the planet chose change over comfort. Because comfort doesn't create resilience. And Earth. Earth was learning how to endure. It began with bubbles. Millions of them. Tiny, translucent pockets rising from the sea floor to the surface, bursting with a gas that, at the time, meant nothing. Oxygen. For hundreds of millions of years, it had been a whisper. A trace. A rarity. Produced in secret by ancient microbes, then quickly consumed, by iron in the oceans, by methane in the air, by rocks that drank it like fire. But there came a time when the planet could hold no more. The sinks were full. The iron was gone. The methane, broken. And oxygen, once fragile, once fleeting, began to stay. At first, nothing changed. The sky still looked the same. The oceans still shimmered with their strange green haze. The microbial mats still carpeted the sea floor like forgotten tapestries. But inside the cells, panic was brewing. Because oxygen, for them, was not life. It was poison. It shattered proteins. It broke molecular chains. It burned from the inside. The very creatures who had created this gas were now surrounded by it. Trapped in an atmosphere of their own making. Some died. Silently. By the billions. Others retreated, into the depths, into anoxic corners of the world, into rocks and vents and shadows. The earth did not mourn them. It simply changed. The sky began to shift. It grew clearer. Less dense. More blue. The greenhouse gases were retreating. Methane had been shattered by oxygen's rising tide, and without its warmth, the earth cooled. Ice returned. The sun's light reached farther. The ocean stirred with new chemistry. It was the beginning of the great oxidation event. A planetary turning point. A biochemical betrayal. A quiet genocide, led not by violence, but by breath. And yet, it was also the moment Earth became recognizable. Because oxygen did more than destroy. It opened doors. With oxygen came new forms of metabolism, more efficient, more powerful. Energy could now be stored in greater quantities. Cells could grow larger. Structures could become more complex. For the first time, the building blocks of plants, animals, movement, thought, became possible. Not immediate. Not yet. But inevitable. The planet had changed its rules. And it could never go back. The seas would never again be purely methane. The sky would never again be wrapped in haze. The air would never again be silent. Oxygen had rewritten the story. And the price was high. Entire lineages lost. Entire biomes extinguished. But from that silence, something new rose. The sea that wasn't water had now become something else entirely. Not just liquid. Not just chemistry. But history. And from its depths, a planet no longer ruled by luck. But by transformation. You're breathing. Right now. Maybe without noticing. Maybe without thinking. But every breath you take carries the signature of a world you'll never fully know. Oxygen. Invisible, effortless, vital. It fills your lungs, fuels your thoughts, slips into your blood like a secret. But it wasn't always here. You've just journeyed through a planet that had no room for lungs. A world that once gasped with methane and ammonia. Where the sky was not blue. Where the sea did not welcome. Where life itself had to build the very air it would someday use to breathe. And now, you do it without asking. Inhale. Exhale. A rhythm borrowed from a revolution that began long before you arrived. The ground beneath you, solid, quiet, familiar, was once magma. Once split. Once shattered and rebuilt by forces too slow to see. But you walk on it now. As if it has always been there. The oceans you dream beside, the ones that cradle continents and reflect moonlight, were not always made of water. They were once seas of methane. Of chemical ghosts. Of silence. But now they hold whales. Coral reefs. Your childhood summers. And the sky. That endless, forgettable sky. So often taken for granted. So easily dismissed. It was earned. Layer by layer. Molecule by molecule. Breath by unintended breath. No one designed it. No one commanded the blue to arrive. It simply became. Through heat. Through death. Through time. And now it's yours. It presses gently on your skin. It scatters sunlight into afternoon. It cradles storms, birds, satellites, wishes. You are not separate from this story. You are its continuation. In your cells are atoms forged in the planet's first fires. In your blood is iron that once rusted on the bottom of silent seas. In your bones is calcium pulled from oceans that had no name. You are not living on Earth. You are Earth, thinking, breathing, remembering. So when you look up at the sky tonight, or feel the breeze on your face, or watch the rain run down a window, know this. What you call normal was once unthinkable. And somewhere, beneath everything you see, the planet still remembers. Some stories are not meant to be told. They are meant to be felt. Not through words. Not through facts. But through silence. Through the weight of still oceans. Through skies that never broke into blue. Through molecules that moved slowly, but never stopped. You've been traveling through time. Not as a visitor. But as something far more intimate. A memory. Because deep down, some part of you already knew. That the world was once unrecognizable. That everything you now call beautiful. Air, light, color, breath. Was once a threat. Once a dream. Once impossible. But the earth didn't give up. It didn't rush. It didn't ask for permission. It simply kept becoming. Drop by drop. Layer by layer. Loss by silent loss. It turned poison into breath. Fire into form. Stillness into story. And now you. Curled under a blanket. Somewhere between sleep and waking. You carry all of it. In your blood. In your breath. In the way your body trusts the world to hold you tonight. Not because it always did. But because, eventually. It chose to. And that sea. That wasn't water. Is still out there. Not in the oceans. But in the memories of stone. In the scars beneath the continents. In the echo between your inhale. And your exhale. Sleep well. The earth is still spinning. And you. You are still part of its story.